Welcome back to In the Can. We are talking about Oklahoma City now. It's a brand new documentary that's making its debut here at Sundance. Hard to believe that Oklahoma City actually happened in 1995, 22 years ago. But watching the clip, it all came rushing back to me. I was working in television news at that time. So it was, as it happened, to bring it back was really quite something. We have Barak Goodman here. He's the director, writer, screenwriter, kind of man about town for this whole film. And why did you feel it's so important to tell the story again now?
Well, the origins of the story came from Mark Samuels, who was the executive producer of American Experience at PBS, and I think he felt that there'd never been a really deep dive into this story. We'd all kind of heard about the story. We knew that Timothy McVeigh was the culprit, but where did he come from? What were the roots? What were the ideas that were percolating around at the time that led him to this act? And so, long before our current political situation, Mark decided it was worth looking at.
Let's talk a little bit about Timothy McVeigh, because he actually was a Gulf War vet. He made a 180-degree turnaround. What caused that?
You know, it's always a really tough question to understand why a person decides one day that he's hell-bent on committing an act of terrorism. There's a radicalization process,
sure.
And you can find roots all the way back in his childhood. He was a huge gun lover. He was a somewhat isolated person. He was a person who always felt that he was better than the life he was living. Mm-hmm. He was smarter than, he was destined for great things. But he lived a very isolated life outside of Buffalo, estranged from his family. And he was a very bright guy, and he fell into this movement, this sort of far right-wing extremist anti-government movement. And all these things came together for him, and he decided that he was going to extract a penalty from the government by attacking one of its buildings.
Kind of the perfect storm of everything
exactly.
for him.
Yeah.
Now, you were able to find new biographers, new witnesses. After 22 years, how were you able to do that?
Well, the film is really a lot about the events that led up to Oklahoma City. So we'd spend a lot of time on two other very famous standoffs between government and extremists. One in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, the other in Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians. Mm-hmm. And there we were able to unearth footage, people that either hadn't spoken or had spoken very little before. Some of these stories, particularly Ruby Ridge, just hadn't been looked at in a deep way. So on film, there were some good books about them. But so we were lucky that way. We were able to really have a sort of a fresh look at these somewhat known events.
Was it difficult to get them to talk again?
Very. Particularly, there's a member of the Weaver family who appears not so in Oklahoma City, but in a spin-off film that we did. We did a whole spin-off film only about Ruby Ridge. Sarah Weaver, the eldest daughter of the Weaver family. And there was a courtship there that had to take place before she agreed. But all the way through the film, you know, law enforcement officers, people who were involved, Branch Davidians, they all were reluctant to relive
sure.
this history, to talk about these things, but I think they all, to a person, found a value in coming out and talking.
It was really interesting that you tied all three of those together. That had to take, I mean, there's so much material about all three events. How did you boil it down into a documentary for here at Sundance?
Well, that's a great question. It was not easy. Well, our first cut of the film was 3 hours long, and each story was essentially an hour. And in fact, the Ruby Ridge story was so rich that Mark Samuels decided to spin it off as its own film. But no, it wasn't easy, but we needed to do that because these were the seminal events in McVeigh's own mind. You know, he was incredibly moved by what happened at Ruby Ridge, and even more so what happened at Waco. April 19th, the date of the bombing in Oklahoma City, is the anniversary of the fire at Waco. So you can't explain Oklahoma City without explaining these other things. And we needed to see how the government itself played into the worst paranoid fears of the far right by its own mishandling of these events. So we needed to get into some depth there. But yes, it was the biggest challenge of the film, was how to weave these stories through.
What has the reaction been from folks who know that you're working on this project? I mean, this is it's pre-9/11,
right.
Kind of digs up a whole lot of things that people had forgotten.
Right. Well, you know, it's important, I think people understand it's important that we not solely focus our terrorism lens on the Middle East. We have a long history in this country of domestic terrorism,
sure.
on the right and the left. You know, you talk about the Weather Underground, the SLA, there's groups on the left as well. But you know, the FBI and law enforcement are well aware of this problem, and if you ask many of them, they might even say it's a more serious problem than what we face from foreigners coming in.
Right.
So it's good to remind people, I think, that this exists. It has existed for a long time, and it's still the worst act of domestic terrorism in our history was Oklahoma City, not any of these other sort of Muslim-based, extremist attacks.
I think people will be kind of shocked to realize that it actually is homegrown rather than imported. That is some of the worst violence that we've had here.
For sure, and one of my favorite moments in the film is when one of the journalists who was covering it at the time describes the moment he saw McVeigh, and the very first time McVeigh was brought out in front of the cameras after he was arrested, and the shock of recognition that this guy, he looked like an all-American kid. He was crew cut, he was a soldier, erect bearing, he was one of us, as he says in the film. And that still shocks even to this day.
Makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck, doesn't it?
It does.
We have a trailer from the film Oklahoma City all wrapped up. We want to let you see it right now. Take a look. Unbelievable. It really kind of shakes you. And then you were pointing out some video that we had never seen before. It's crazy that you can still find brand new things.
You know, it's amazing in these historical film projects. You always find something that's sitting in someone's basement or in someone's closet or some archive or library, and no one's looked at it.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And you have a couple special guests coming to the premiere today at 11:30.
We do. We have Sheriff Jerry Flowers, who was one of the very first responders into the building and has these sort of raw recollections of what he saw and the people he helped save. And we have this incredibly moving a woman named Helena Garrett, who lost her 1-year-old son Tevin. There were 16, I believe, children died in the bombing, and hers was one of them. And her dignity, her strength, even all this time later, she's amazing. So we're really privileged to have them.
Just before we let you go, I know that your movie is going straight to PBS in a little bit. When is that going to happen?
It's on the air on February 7th on PBS, yeah. So
if somebody can't get a ticket this week, which is going to be difficult to get, you'll still be able to see it.
For sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Barak,
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
So today, 11:30 at the Mark is the world debut of Oklahoma City. Go see it if you can. We'll be right back.